Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to do something that I've been meaning to do for quite a while, and that is to go through my camera bag to show you all the equipment that I take out in the field, and not just for photography but also how I film these videos, because I've been looking at camera bag videos on YouTube for quite a long time, but it's very rare to see photographers who are kind of YouTube photographers talk about how they actually film their videos. So if you're a YouTube photographer and if you make vlogs out in the field, then hopefully this video will cover everything that you might need. But before we get into all the equipment that is in my camera bag, to make up for the fact that I'm not doing this video out in the field this week because the weather has been absolutely abysmal, so to make up for the fact that I'm not outside, I'm going to share some photos with you that I took a couple of weeks ago on my trip down to Pembrokeshire. Now, it was a holiday, I didn't take an awful lot of photos, but I did manage to take a few on some evenings where there was some really nice light. So before we get into the camera bag, let's have a look at some of these photos. So I hope you enjoyed those photos. Leave a comment down below and let me know which ones were your favourite. But without further ado, let's get into the things that are in my camera bag, starting with the bag itself. So my camera bag is a Shimoda Explorer and it's a 40-litre pack, and I've had this for coming up to a year now, and I absolutely love this bag. As you'll see throughout this video, I like to try and keep things fairly minimal when it comes to my kit because I like to walk. I'm a big advocate of hiking. I like to go up mountains, up hills and on longer walks, and I want to be able to have something on my back that is fairly supportive. You know, I don't want anything that is going to cause me lots of aches and pains, and although I don't take an awful lot of equipment out with me, I do want to make sure that that equipment is nice and secure. So the thing that I love about the Shimoda bag in particular is the fact that when you're wearing it, the weight bearing aspect of it is just absolutely fantastic. Cannot fault it in any way. I've worn this bag for, you know, entire days out in the field and it doesn't hurt my shoulders. There's lots of different ways you can adjust the straps and the waist support to make sure that it fits you perfectly. I have absolutely no complaints with this particular bag, and I know Shimoda is slightly more in the sort of higher price range, but I managed to pick this one up in the sale around about August, September time, so keep your eye out online because there might be some sales coming up, and I managed to get this for around about £150, which if you are familiar with Shimoda, you'll know is a little bit of a bargain. So now let's talk about the camera gear, because that's going to be the main portion of this video, and the main camera that I use for both photo and video is the Sony a7 III, and it's the video camera that I'm using now to film this particular shot. I have kind of mixed feelings about the Sony a7 III, to be honest. I find it probably the most uninteresting camera that I could possibly own. And yes, on the one hand, that is a negative, but the thing that makes it quite uninteresting is that it's just a bit of a workhorse. It just does everything really well, but it doesn't necessarily have very much character. A lot of people transition over to the Fuji systems because of the things like film simulations and the Fuji colors and the tactile aspect of using cameras such as Fuji's and Leicas, and a lot of people obviously who do landscape photography enjoy the Nikon systems. Maybe people shoot with Canon, but I think Sony just kind of does everything pretty well without being sort of too flashy about it. So I have contemplated upgrading or switching out, or maybe getting one of the newer models of the Sony cameras, but because I do video and because I also do photography, I haven't really found anything that matches the specs of this Sony a7 III. Yes, you're not going to get as many megapixels as, say, the Sony a7R4, and you're not going to necessarily get the video specs of some of the Sony a7S cameras, but I think for people who are just looking for kind of the best bang for the buck, then I still think the Sony a7 III, even in 2023, is still a really compelling option, even though this camera is quite a few years old now. It's around 24 megapixels, which is fine. Yes, I do prints, but I'm only ever really kind of printing as big as A2, so extra megapixels for extra definition isn't really kind of something that troubles me too much. I really enjoy being able to shoot in S-Log. All of my videos are shot in S-Log 2, which is Sony's flat color profile. It's got 8-bit color, I think. And I really enjoy the way that the footage looks out of the camera. It's really easy to color grade, and people moan about Sony colors and things like that, but I don't really have any issues in that area. I really like this camera. Like I say, it doesn't inspire me, doesn't interest me, but it does a great job. And for that, I've kind of held on to it. But I might do another video in a few weeks just about reasons to upgrade your camera and when you should upgrade, because I think some of the thoughts that I'm having around this camera at the minute might lead to some interesting conversation in that topic. And now we're going to talk about some of the lenses that I use. So really, whenever I'm out, for the most part, I'm only really carrying 2 lenses with me. The first is the Tamron 28 to 75mm f2.8. Now, I am a massive fan of the Tamron lenses. I know a lot of die-hard photographers have very strong opinions about third-party lenses, and they say that the glass isn't as good and they're not as sharp and all of this sort of stuff, and you can believe that as much as you would like. It's all dependent on budget. Yes, if we all had unlimited budget, we would all be out buying the very, very best glass from all of the sort of native glass for your camera bodies. You know, for Sony, that would be the G Master lenses. But for me, you know, those kind of law of diminishing returns, as you get to a certain point, the, you know, price point wise, the differences that you're going to see are pretty incremental. And I always found that the Tamron 28 to 75 and any of the Tamron lenses that are kind of in this, I think it's the Di3 RXD line. There might be a slightly abbreviated title for them, but that's just what it says on the camera lens there. But what I found with this lens is that it just works so well for so many different applications. 28mm on full frame is pretty much wide enough for me for the most part. And there's another lens that I pair with this if I want to go wider. But being able to go up to 75mm on the kind of longer end of this focal length, I find it far more useful than what the native Sony lens would be, which would be a 24 to 70. So I'm getting an extra 5mm on the long end, which for landscape stuff actually is really beneficial. You know, it's quite often you get to 70mm and you just want that tiny, tiny little bit more. And having a lens like this just enables you to get that. And a handy little trick that I have for anybody who wants to get a little bit more out of the focal length on the longer end of the scale is that in the Sony system, and I'm sure other full frame cameras will probably have a similar feature, but on the Sony, I can basically add an APS-C crop to the full frame sensor, which basically just gives me an extra 1.5% magnification. So I just have a custom button set up on the back of my camera. So if I'm out in the field and 75mm just isn't quite enough, I've got at the push of a button a way to magnify this further. And yes, then you're not getting the full frame, you know, aspect of the sensor, but you're still getting a load of great sharpness, you're still getting a lot of detail, because, you know, a lot of people say that APS-C isn't as good as full frame. Again, if you're not doing massive prints, if you're just sharing stuff on social media, then you're really not going to necessarily notice the difference. And yes, you might not get the same compression because you're kind of artificially, I guess, zooming in as opposed to actually zooming in on the lens itself. But if you just need a little bit of extra reach, then I highly recommend looking into that as a feature, because that takes for this 75mm focal length and you're getting close to around 100mm. So you're getting pretty telephoto just with one lens. Having the 2.8 aperture as well is just really, really good. I like that shallow depth of field. It's good for video because it lets in more light, which just means that if it's, you know, a particularly dark area, if it's an overcast day, then I can still get the exposure settings that I need on the camera without having to worry about, you know, upping the ISO too much. And if you're doing things like astrophotography, which I have messed around with, again, f2.8 is going to be a really useful aperture for you. More beneficial to have like a 1.8 or something slightly wider, but if you're just getting into it or you don't do it that often, f2.8 is going to do a really good job for you. I'm a massive fan of this lens. It comes in at probably anywhere from around £600 to £1,000, whether you're getting it new or used, but I've had this for coming up to about 3 years now. It's absolutely great. I use this, I would say, over 80% of the time. If you've ever seen any of the photos on my Instagram, in my portfolio, on this YouTube channel, then 80% of those photos will be taken with this lens. So the lens that makes up the other kind of 20% of the photos that you might see on this channel or on social media, for me, is the Sony 20mm f1.8. It's a bit of an all-rounder for me. It's what I'm actually filming this video on now because I find this focal length really great for my YouTube channel when I'm doing these kind of like talking head pieces in the office, because 20mm I find just a great focal length. I did a video on the Sony 20mm f1.8 lens and I will put a link to it up on screen here somewhere, and I'll put it down in the description. So after you've watched this video, feel free to go and check that one out for all the information about this lens. But what I really enjoy is that field of view that 20mm gives you. I'm not necessarily a massive fan of super wide angle, and in fact, I'll sort of rephrase that. I don't necessarily find myself in situations where I would want to use super wide angle lenses that often. Therefore, it doesn't necessarily make it feasible for me to invest so much money in a lens that would be, 12mm, 14mm, 16mm, these variable zoom lenses that you can get that are dedicated to wide angle, because I just don't necessarily use those super wide focal lengths very much. I find 20mm is still wide, it's still really, really wide, great for big vistas, great for exaggerating foreground. But for me, it just has a slightly more natural look to it. And that's something that I really enjoy in my photography. I don't like things that are too distorted or super exaggerated. I like everything to vaguely kind of feel as it does when you look at the scene with your eyes, but maybe with just a few elements exaggerated for a slightly more artistic perspective, if the scene calls for it. The 20mm f1.8 is a G lens from Sony. It's a native lens. It's really, really sharp because it's a prime lens. That's the benefit of going for a prime over a zoom lens, is that you do definitely get better performance in terms of sharpness. And I just feel with this particular lens, it's slightly more versatile than some super wide angle lenses, because it's kind of splitting the difference between what would be a super wide angle lens and something like my 28 to 75 that I mentioned earlier. That 20mm, just an extra 8mm wider, I just find that covers all the bases for me. So next I want to talk about my newest addition to the camera bag, and that is my drone. So I only recently got this drone sort of a few months ago. I've only flown it a handful of times, so I don't necessarily have all the information to give you a very accurate review at this point. Leave a comment down below if you would like me to do a review on this drone. And this drone is the DJI Mini 3. It's the newest drone in their sort of mini lineup, I believe. And for somebody who doesn't necessarily do drone photography, but wants to do it for YouTube purposes, this is definitely a YouTube focused element of my camera bag. I'm just using it for things like B-roll and establishing shots in my videos, and I do like to do a little bit of photography. If you watched last week's video, I did share some photos that I took with this drone, but there's a lot of reasons why I decided to get this over some of the other DJI drones. Now, the first reason is its kind of value for money. It's sort of on the lower end of the spectrum in terms of their lineup for price, and because it's still only 249 grams, it does come under the weight regulations and restrictions, meaning you can pretty much fly this wherever you want to, and you don't necessarily need to register it. Now, the thing that really kind of made this compelling for me is the fact that the actual features that it has makes it quite good for, firstly, people who are very new to flying drones, which I certainly am, and it's really, really applicable for the kind of current climate of social media. It can shoot 4K at 30 frames per second, which is absolutely great. You don't necessarily need any more than 4K, or at least I don't. And the great thing about this is that you can actually shoot in vertical and landscape orientation. So for things like YouTube Shorts, or for creating reels, or anything that's kind of vertical video or photo for social media, you can do that really easily without necessarily having to crop or manipulate the photo or the file, which is what you had to do with some of the older drones. But it's nice to be able to get vertical video and photos without losing the crop. And you also have a feature on the photo mode that allows you to shoot bigger files of up to 48 megapixels, and it just does that in a pretty clever way. Just gives you a little bit more latitude and a bit more flexibility in editing in post. You've got a little bit more megapixels to work with there, which I actually find really, really useful. So I'm a big advocate of this. Again, it's really small, so it doesn't take up much room in the bag. It's really easy to fly. It's very stable. It's got good flight time, I think up to 38 minutes, which is a little bit longer than some of the older mini drones. So yeah, big review coming in a couple of months, or in a few weeks maybe. Once I've flown it a bit more, I'll give you my proper ins and outs and all of my opinions on this drone. But first impressions, really, really good value. Highly recommend it for anyone who is just getting into drone photography. So another camera that I own that is very YouTube specific, I don't tend to use this for anything other than YouTube, is the GoPro Hero 7 Black. Now, I don't necessarily use the GoPro very often. I tend to just use it for vlogging more than anything else. And I was going to use it to try and do some filming of the back of the camera and things like that, but it's just not easy to do that. There's not enough sort of flexibility for me in terms of settings to be able to get the exposure correct. But if I want to be a little bit more dynamic in the vlogging side of things, so I don't need to set up like a static angle on a tripod for a talking headpiece, then I'll just use the GoPro just to vlog on. Like I said, it's not something that I use an awful lot, but I have used it in certain clips and it's worked quite well. Some of the color profiles do match up quite nicely to the log footage that I shoot out of the Sony a7 III, but I'm a real stickler for trying to get the production value on these videos as kind of good as I can, and I don't necessarily like having different cameras in different color profiles because I think it's quite obvious to tell that you've changed camera, and I don't necessarily want that to be noticeable in these videos. I would much prefer to have another Sony a7 III or another camera that can shoot in log format, just to make everything a little bit more seamless. But I understand that might just be me, I guess, trying too hard. Maybe people don't care about that, but it's something that I really care about. I want these videos to be as good as they can be because you dedicate a lot of time to watching them, which I'm very grateful for. So yeah, GoPro, useful to have, good for sort of like B-roll, I suppose, and for just kind of action sequences, but I'm not particularly action sequence heavy. I'm not going to be jet skiing or jumping out of a plane or anything like that. So maybe a bit redundant, but doesn't take up much room. So perfectly fine to have in the bag as and when I need it. And the final camera that I'll talk about, and it's not one that I bring out all the time, but it is my 35mm film camera, which is the Minolta X700. Now, I have done a couple of videos on this channel last year about my kind of foray into 35mm film photography, and I'll link some of those up here and down in the description so you can go and check that out. I've just liked the process of shooting film. I don't do it as much these days just because film is becoming astronomically expensive, and I don't necessarily do it often enough to really kind of warrant paying all of that money for film. You know, it's not a big part of my portfolio, it's not a big part of the work that I do, so I'm only really kind of shooting film just for my own enjoyment. But I do like to have a film camera just in case. I have a few lenses that come with this, and I've shot a few rolls of film now. I do enjoy the process. You know, it is fun. It's great to be able to appreciate what photography used to be. You know, I'm very lucky to have grown up in an age of photography that was primarily digital. You know, I didn't take up photography, you know, until all cameras were digital pretty much. You know, film was pretty much dying out when I first picked up a camera. But it's nice that film photography makes you more intentional with your photos. You know, whenever I've shot film, I've been very, very considerate in terms of what I'm shooting. I take a lot more time because every photo costs about £1.50 these days, by the looks of it anyway, if film prices carry on rising at the rates that they are. So for that, I'm very grateful for film photography. It is fun, it's a fun challenge, but it's not something that I do an awful lot. But if you would like to see some more film photography videos on this channel, if you want to see this out in the landscape, to do some landscape photography on 35mm film, then leave a comment down below, and yeah, I'll go and sell a kidney, buy some film, and we'll make it happen. Now, the final section of this what's in my camera bag video is going to be more dedicated to the accessories that I have in my bag. And for anyone who is new into photography, or if you're sort of just getting into putting a camera bag together, then these are going to be the things that I definitely recommend that you have in there. So first of all, let's talk about tripods. So my main tripod for photography and video is the three-legged thing Corey. Three-legged thing is a really cool tripod company, actually. I've seen a lot of landscape photographers use these, and I was looking to just upgrade from the K&F concept tripod, which was just a fairly inexpensive one that I bought off Amazon. It's what this camera is placed on right now, and I do bring that just to do video stuff out in the field for YouTube, but for photography, this is the tripod that I will put my camera on, because it's far more secure and a little bit more sturdy than the more affordable option. Things I really like about this: the design, first of all, is great. I think these are super well made. It's really nice because it has these kind of bubble lock, I think they're called, legs, so you just twist and extend them, as opposed to using the traditional sort of like clamps, brackets. You know, I always just found those a little bit tricky, especially if you're just trying to, you know, quickly adjust or adapt the height for a particular scene. If you're moving quickly because the light's changing, it's nice to be able to just quickly release all of the legs, and you can pretty much do it with one hand. If I just do this now with all of these, then pretty much everything will come out all in one, which I just think is absolutely great. It has a maximum height of 1.5 meters with the sensor column. It is the one sort of bugbear that I have with this tripod, is that sometimes I just wish it was a little bit higher. I can still get it to near head height, but when I'm doing things like woodland photography, where you really just want to get that elevation so you're getting the correct perspective, it's just sometimes a little bit tricky to get enough height on this. On the kind of flip side though, you can get this very, very low. I think you can get it as low as like 10 centimeters off the ground, which is pretty amazing. But it might be something that I upgrade in the next 6 months or so. I am looking at some of the Benro tripods, but I just think if you're just looking to get into landscape photography and you're looking for a good sturdy tripod, this is definitely one that I would recommend looking into. And because it's black and orange, kind of matches the Sony a7 III, which kind of makes me happy. Now, another YouTube specific accessory is the DJI mics that I use to record all of my videos. It's what I'm wearing right now. And I've acquired these sort of in the last couple of months really, and I've been really, really happy with them. I've seen a lot of people using the Rode Wireless Go's, which were pretty much the old industry standard, but a lot of people seem to transition over to these, and I can absolutely see why. They're really, really easy to use. You've got great range, so I can set this up on my camera and I can walk miles away to have, you know, an interesting perspective for like a talking head out in the field, and there's no issues with connectivity and things like that. The way that I use it is I record all of the audio internally, so it's saved within the transmitter. Just means that I'm not necessarily going to lose, you know, any clips. You know, nothing's going to go wrong. It just means that there's always a backup, and then I'll just import that into Final Cut and I'll sync all the video with the audio, and it's all really seamless and really easy to do. So if you like the audio quality of this channel, then that's probably why. I also use this for doing sort of overdubs, or if I'm doing a voiceover on some of my videos, then rather than using a normal microphone, which I could do, I tend to just use the mics, these ones instead. And I think the audio quality is just as good, especially if you just add some compression and do a little bit of work in post-production. I also have a Rode video mic, which I sometimes just put on top of the camera just to capture some ambient sounds from, you know, the landscape. If I want to capture the sound of waves or birds or anything that just, you know, adds a little bit more immersion into the videos, then I'll just have that as a backup. And if anything ever goes wrong with these microphones, then I've also got that in my bag, which will do me, you know, just fine if anything goes wrong. Not quite as good audio quality for, you know, vlogging, but for kind of more ambient Foley stuff, I think those Rode video mics are really good. I do also want to talk about filters, because being a landscape photographer, I find filters to be really, really important, especially if you want to do things like long exposures, or if you're wanting to do things like polarization to remove glare off water for like waterfalls or seascapes. And the filters that I use are just the Kase filters. I have a circular polarizer and I have a couple of ND filters. And it's just great to have. Like I say, I don't necessarily use them all of the time, but they are great to have when the scene requires one, so to speak. They're great. I love the packaging. This leather pouch is pretty indestructible, and it's nice that it has this clip, so it means I can clip it to the bottom of my tripod, just to keep everything really easily accessible when I'm out in the field. Another accessory that I always have in my camera bag is some kind of cleaning kit. It's really, really important. I hate Photoshop and clone removal tools and things like that. And if I've got dust spots on my sensor or on my lens, it absolutely drives me mad. So I always have some of these swabs, a cleaning cloth, and some of these wipes with the cleaning fluid. And I'll always just make sure that before most shoots, or even if I'm out in the field and I've forgotten to do it at home, I can quickly sort of give my lenses a clean, give the sensor a clean. Not great to do it outdoors. You should probably do it inside if you are going to clean your sensors, because you don't want to add potentially more water or dust to that. But if you're ever in a pinch, just having one of these, I bought this off Amazon, I think it was like £20, something like that, so fairly inexpensive, and it just goes in my camera bag, goes everywhere with me, just in case, because there's nothing worse than taking a really great photo only to find that you've got loads of dust spots, and sometimes they're easy to remove and sometimes they're a bit tricky. So mitigate it is my advice as much as you can. And the final thing that I always have in my camera bag, because I live in Wales in the UK and it rains all of the time, is that I'll always have a waterproof coat that I can pack down and put into my backpack. I've got this one from Patagonia. I love Patagonia. I always think a good quality raincoat will just serve you well. It's one of those things that I don't mind investing more money in. Anything to do with like clothing or footwear, I always just think it's the best idea to buy the best quality thing that you can, even if it means just saving up, because it's one of these things where you buy it once and that's it. You know, you buy something cheaper, you might be buying it time and time again if it wears out. I've had this for a couple of years. It still feels brand new. So top tip, invest in some good quality outdoor clothing, because your future self will definitely thank you for it. So anyway guys, that is a look at what's in my camera bag. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I am hoping to get out in the field to do a landscape photography vlog in the next one. So if you are interested in following along, then do consider hitting that subscribe button and give the video a thumbs up if you have enjoyed it. It helps people find this video who might find it helpful. And who doesn't love a good what's in my camera bag video? As always, thank you so much for watching. Look forward to hearing from you down in the comments. And I'll see you all next Thursday at around 5 PM for another video.